Awesome. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ariel. I am the Caregiver Support and Education Specialist for Care Partners. And this is our final presentation of our legal and financial series. Probably the most popular one, I would say, Medicaid 101. I see Angela, she's shaking her head. So I hope you all are prepared and you have your notepads and you're ready to ask a lot of great questions because it is going to be a wonderful 1 hour. And I don't even think 1 hour is enough to cover Medicaid, but we're going to try to do our best to cover as much as we can in this short period of time. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Linda, who is with AARP, and they are our sponsor, our education sponsor for most of our education programs. And then after that, you will hear from Angela Odinsky. She is an elder law attorney with a wealth of knowledge. So if you've been here for the past 2 weeks, then you know. If you don't, go back and watch the videos. We've been sending them out. But we are so grateful for each of you all for being here today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Linda, and then we'll hear from Angela to take a deeper dive into Medicaid.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I am Linda Cantu, a volunteer for AARP here in Houston. And as everybody knows, or I hope everyone knows, that AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan member organization dedicated to providing information and resources that are important to people 50 plus and their families. AARP's special mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And through educational offerings like our workshops and cooking demos, we can provide our members and friends with helpful information like our healthy cooking series, Zumba classes, and with partners like Care Partners. And if you're interested in learning more about Houston offerings, please visit us at www.aarp.org/Houston. And we can be found on Facebook, YouTube, and X, formerly known as Twitter, as at AARP Texas. Now, for those of you who are not in the Houston area, you can visit aarp.org/near you for information near you, including free events, resources, and volunteer opportunities. And remember, AARP is always looking for volunteers. Now, if you have any questions about AARP or you want to ask a question to our guest speakers, please use the chat area and we'll cover the questions at the end of the call. Now, I would like to introduce you again to Ariel Green, Caregiver Support and Education Specialist with Care Partners. Again, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Linda. And I
You're
just want
welcome.
to make a plug. So AARP is hosting a Men Who Care Caregiver Conference in Houston. And that is going to be, I believe, next Saturday, the 29th. But I'll send that information out. So if you are a male caregiver, this is going to be a wonderful conference. And so I'll be sure to share that information at the end of the series. I'll email it out to everyone. But I think it's going to be a great day. We don't have a lot of resources for male caregivers, and I think that's a forgotten group, and it's very important. So I'm really happy that AARP is taking this on to provide resources. So I'm going to turn it over to Angela. You should be able to share your screen. Again, if you all have any questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box. Angela and I monitor that throughout the presentation, and you typically are able to answer live, right, Angela? If the question is, if it's quick enough and it's relevant to the topic, then she can answer it live. If it's too deep, she's gonna say, I think I've heard it enough times, Angela. I don't know if I'll be able to answer that today, but there is an answer, but it might be too long or too specific. So take it away, Angela.
Perfect. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Linda. I always love coming to do these things. I love being invited. I think education is so important, especially as we age. It's like I get clients all the time who feel bad that they don't know things. And my response is always, how would you know things? Like, at what point in time has anyone offered you any of this information, right? Because generally speaking, the internet is not your friend when it comes to like trying to figure out and navigate long-term care. So I so appreciate everything that Ariel does. I appreciate everything that AARP does, because it's so necessary. These sort of educational seminars are so important because they just like, why would you know? How could you possibly know? Um, so if y'all can all see my screen, it just says, has my name, the law office of Angela Odinsky. It's Medicaid 101. This is the third part of the series. So we talked about essential estate planning documents in number 1, and then we talked about planning ahead for your long-term care in number 2. And now we're talking basically about crisis in number 3. So what happens when we get to a point where oh my God, mom has fallen, she's broken something, and now we're in the hospital, and we're going from the hospital to rehab, and we're going to be in rehab for our 20 days. And then we have to figure out what to do because mom can't go home alone. And she can't be taken care of at home. We can't afford it. Like, where are we at? Like, what are our options? And so generally speaking, depending on like what the circumstances are and what the financial situation is, we could be looking at just, spending the money that we have for care, or we could be looking at applying for Medicaid. And so, like Ariel was saying, this is one of the more popular. It has the most questions, I think, and it should. I was just recently having a consultation with a client earlier today, and I had to kind of prepare them for the fact that so many of the rules that we have to deal with have nothing, that they don't feel intuitive, they don't feel logical, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to deal with them, right? They seem really weird or unfair or archaic, and so we just have to know how to deal with them, and that's the point. And so I am a certified elder law attorney. And what that means is that I have had additional training and taken additional tests in helping families navigate specifically dementia and dementia-related legal issues that might arise, decision-making capacity, things of that nature. And so I work with clients to achieve Medicaid qualification, to figure out what it is that we need to do. Now, as I said in my other 2, Medicaid avoidance is always going to be the priority. Like, we want to age with dignity. We want to create our own futures and make our own decisions for as long as we can, and make this as much about what we want as and our intention as possible. But sometimes we get to a point where we can't. It's no longer in our hands to make these decisions. And now the family members are struggling to figure out what to do, how to pay for it, how to honor mom's intentions, how to honor mom's wishes, and still make sure that mom gets the care she needs. And so we're going to be talking about Medicaid. So I mentioned the term crisis planning, right? And so what do we mean when we say crisis planning? It's unexpected, unplanned need for long-term care, medical care, or unexpected, unplanned need for personal care in several areas, and require assistance to pay for that unexpected care, right? So usually, like, there's 2 ways this happens, right? So somebody gets a diagnosis of dementia, they're doing fine. Everyone expects that their money's going to last for them, and that they're going to be that they're just going to be able to continue in the same vein, and family's going to pick up the slack, and we're going to be okay. And then, like I said, there's a fall or something happens, and we're in crisis. What do we do? The other thing is someone moving right along, everything's happening, like they are good. They are living on their own or with family. They are making their own dinner. They're going to happy hour. They are living their lives, and then they have a stroke. Those are very 2 common scenarios as far as like what happens when we're in crisis planning. So long-term care includes this sort of personal care needs: bathing, dressing, eating, moving from one place to another, toileting, caring for pets, shopping, housework, like all of the things that we do in a day, activities of daily living. if you have long-term care insurance or ever looked at long-term care insurance, one of the triggers for allowing long-term care insurance is somebody needs assistance with, 3 activities of daily living. And so someone will have to come in and do an assessment and say, they're not able to transfer from one room to the next without assistance. They're not able to cook for themselves. They're not able to, you know, uh, dress themselves, bathe, etc. So those are kind of the activities of daily living that we're looking at when we're talking about sort of like when we can trigger long-term care insurance. And also what we're looking at when we're talking about whether or not somebody might meet medical necessity, which I'm going to get to. Okay, private caretakers are sometimes enough, right? I think one of the things that I've been stressing is that we want to do everything we can ahead of time and to avoid Medicaid if it's possible. If it's not possible, then we want to have a plan in place. Absolutely. But Medicaid avoidance is going to be the priority always. And so, there are home healthcare businesses that offer variety services for a certain number of hours or whatever at a variety of different costs. There are individuals out there who can be hired to come in and do home health care. You only want what's needed, not to break the bank, right? So we're trying to do the lowest level of necessary care for the longest period of time to make sure that we maintain the retirement assets for as long as possible. And sometimes paying somebody a little bit can give unpaid caregivers a much needed break. In our last presentation, we talked about how unpaid caregivers are at increased risk of heart disease and stroke and all kinds of illnesses that come with that are stress related illnesses, because being a caretaker is incredibly stressful. And so sometimes it's helpful to go ahead and spend a little bit of money just to give the caretakers a break so that they can get some respite themselves and then come back and continue. Getting help for 10% of the time to be independent for 90% of the time is much, much more preferable than losing 100% of your independence, right? Housing modifications can sometimes make it easier to age in place. Engaging with geriatric care managers or other professionals who can come in and do a home safety evaluation and say, you know what, these are tripping hazards over here. We might want to put in a safety bar over here. Like, here are some things we can do to allow you to age in your home a little bit better, a little bit easier. There are professionals for everything. I think we talked about that the last time as well. No matter what you need to do as you age, there's somebody that you can engage to do that. So now let's get to the nitty gritty, right? What does Medicare pay for? I get a lot of people who confuse Medicare and Medicaid. Even other attorneys confuse these programs because if you don't practice in the elder law context, it doesn't make any sense. The words are so closely related, but they are completely different programs. And so you just kind of have to keep it in your head that these are separate things. They have nothing to do with each other, and they don't cover the same things necessarily, right? So Medicare will cover short stays in rehabilitation facilities if certain criteria are met. There has to be a recent hospital stay of at least 3 days. And that has to have been admitted, not under observation, though I think that they're altering those rules a little bit. Because there was, like in the past, a person could have been in a room, in an actual hospital room, and not have been admitted, right? And so if they were only under observation at the hospital, even though they had been put into a room on their own, then we had a hard time getting this benefit because they weren't technically admitted for that 3-day period. They have to be admitted to a Medicare certified nursing facility within 3 days of the hospital stay. So that's for the rehabilitation. So we kind of talked about like when you go from the hospital to rehabilitation, where you get your physical therapy, occupational therapy, etc. And they have to need some kind of skilled care, skilled nursing services, physical therapy, other types of therapy. And so that's usually what, like, that's the progression that I see all the time, right? Someone goes into the hospital with some kind of event. It doesn't always have to be a broken bone. It can be some other sort of illness, pneumonia, things of that nature. They no longer need hospital care, but they still can't go home. And so they go through rehabilitation to try to get stronger so that they potentially can go home or can be moved to another facility. So Medicare will sometimes pay for rehabilitation, or will pay for rehabilitation if all the criteria are met. So Medicare benefits are, generally speaking, I think my slides got out of order somehow. It's a government-funded healthcare insurance program, right? So think Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, right? That's all it is. It's just health insurance. It pays for your doctors. It pays for hospital benefits. It does not pay for personal needs, right? So it doesn't pay, like Medicare is not going to pay for someone to come out and do the cooking, cleaning, shopping, etc. And it doesn't cover long-term skilled nursing. I can't tell you how many people I've gone toe to toe with who insist that they have a Medicare supplement that's going to cover their long-term care. It will not. Your Medicare supplement might cover additional days in rehabilitation, but it's not going to cover skilled nursing forever. That's just not what Medicare is made for. Medicare is specifically a healthcare insurance program. That's essential. Excuse me. Okay, so how much does Medicare cover? So if Medicare is going to cover that rehabilitation stint, what is it? It's going to cover some costs for up to 100 days. So the first 20 days, it'll cover 100%. Day 21 to day 100, it'll cover the costs of care, but there is a co-insurance payment of $204 per day that the patient is going to be responsible for. So oftentimes what you find is that somebody goes into the rehabilitation facility, and then at day like 19, the facility's like, oh, time's up. And so you can appeal and do stuff, but there's always this concern that Medicare is not going to continue paying. And then some supplements can cover that $204 a day co-insurance, depending on what your supplement is. If you have a Medicare supplement, you should look to see if it does cover that. Day 101 and beyond is the patient's responsibility, 100%. Medicare will still cover your doctor's visits and hospital and stuff, but it won't pay for skilled nursing. It won't pay for a nursing facility. It won't pay for any kind of those sorts of services. Sometimes you can get a doctor to write a prescription for physical therapy or someone to come out to the house to do things like for limited care that Medicare will pay for, shower, physical therapy, occupational therapy, that kind of thing, but it's not full multi-hour a day care. So what is Medicaid? Medicaid is a federal and state benefit program to address the cost of healthcare for low-income families. Texas Medicaid has over 100 different programs. I'm only talking about long-term care. So if you have a neighbor whose child is autistic and they're on Medicaid and they didn't have to do all the stuff that I'm talking about here, that's because they're on a different Medicaid program, right? They're not talking about Medicaid long-term care. They're talking about Medicaid for somebody with another kind of disability. The same for your, neighbor's uncle that got Medicaid for some other reason. However they got it, whatever they had to do, if it was a different program than long-term care, it's irrelevant. So we're focusing this talk on specifically on long-term care. And because this question has been asked in the past about, is this state specific? The answer to that question is yes. Everything I'm saying to you right now is Texas specific. If you are calling in for a loved one in a different state, nothing I'm about to say for pretty much the rest of the slides is going to be relevant. Every state is different. It's a federal funded program that sends money to the states administer it. So each state's program is different. I get this question all the time too. I'm moving mom from Illinois to Texas. She's on Medicaid in Illinois. How do I transfer it? You don't. There's no such thing as transfer. I don't know what Illinois' benefits look like. They may not look like Texas's benefits. When you get to Texas, you start over. Sometimes the recommendation is, well, what benefit are they on? Maybe they should stay there. Maybe they have a better benefit than we have here, right? So that's always going to be a consideration. Before moving somebody to the state of Texas, talk to an elder law attorney in the state where they're at to see what the benefit is and weigh those considerations. Now, I know being close to family is really important, and maybe that's the consideration that wins out, right? We have to prioritize our decision-making tree. But you should before you move somebody from another state who's on Medicaid, you should always understand what the ramifications and what the consequences of that move is going to be, because it does not just transfer. not long-term care. So Medicaid long-term care is a federal program administered by the states, pays for the single largest share of long-term care. Most of the people in nursing homes, a good 70% are paid for by Medicaid. And most nursing facilities in the Houston area, at least, accept Medicaid, have Medicaid beds available. Very few places are private pay only. And so there's no real distinction between a Medicaid facility versus a non-Medicaid facility. It's all kind of the same. And you have to meet both state and federal eligibility requirements. And so that's the differences, because each state is going to have different eligibility requirements. So what does Medicaid pay for? So Medicaid is going to pay for your skilled nursing facility. It's what we think of when we think of the old folks home, right? It's a very institutionalized kind of place that has nurses around the clock, like hospital bed type situations. It is very close to being in a hospital type setting. That is skilled nursing. Medicaid can also pay for some home health care and some assisted living facilities, but I caution that there is a wait list for that, the Star Plus waiver interest list. It's never a bad idea to be on it. We talked about it last time, but there are limits, right? So even though you might get approved for the waiver, you might not be able to find an assisted living facility that accepts it, or you might not be able to find a provider that will accept the Star Plus waiver payment from Medicaid, right? And so it's a great benefit, and like people should use it to stay home as long as possible, understanding that it's not the end all be all, that there are also some limitations and some things that you just have to be aware of when you're considering the Star Plus waiver interest list and trying to get home health care through Medicaid. Now, the Star Plus waiver and skilled nursing Medicaid benefit have the same qualifications. So when we get to the qualifications for long-term care Medicaid in Texas, it is going to be the same for both the home care assisted living benefit and the skilled nursing benefit. Medicaid also might pay for other supports and services depending on need, right? So there are other programs out there that offer like small sums of money to do things like build a ramp or make some home modifications. They are modest sums of money, but sometimes anything can help, right? If it means the difference between staying home or moving into a facility, then maybe like seeing some of those programs is a good idea. Your area agency on aging is a fantastic resource. Again, that was on one of the slides from last week. Every county in Texas has an area agency on aging, and if you are over 65, I highly recommend contacting them just to see if there's any sort of benefit that might be available in the county areas. Again, geriatric care managers also, some of them like make it their business to know the kinds of benefits that their clients might be able to qualify for. And we can talk a little more about care managers towards the end. So why are we trying to qualify for Medicaid? Okay, so if say we have a husband and wife situation. So everything that I'm about to do is sort of going to be a spousal married couple sort of situation. Say husband and wife have $200,000 in savings. Their house is worth $300,000. The husband gets $2,900 in Social Security. The wife receives $1,800 in Social Security. Husband has a stroke and needs care, $8,500 a month. Nursing home will eat up everything in less than 3 years, right? So why do we need Medicaid? We need Medicaid so that the spouse at home can stay at home and live and be able to pay bills and do things, right? So we need to do something to qualify the husband for Medicaid so that we can protect the spouse and allow the spouse to maintain some quality of life and some dignity. And for him to maintain dignity and have the care that he needs, right? Like we want to make sure that we can do these things and make sure that he gets care and she's able to stay at home. So the demographic qualifications, just the overarching, you have to be over 65, blind or disabled, per the Social Security Administration. Now, if you're under 65 and you are disabled, but you don't have a Social Security determination, you still have to meet the same criteria that Social Security uses to determine that disability. And so you just have to have the documents for that to be able to know what that is. So if you're over 65, then you meet that qualification. If you're blind, you meet that qualification. Disabled, you have to have that Social Security disability designation, or you have to show that you meet the same criteria that Social Security uses. You have to be a US citizen or qualified alien. And I know Ariel has asked me this question before about like, well, what about a resident? It is complex, it is complicated, and it is beyond the scope of this particular presentation to get into it. What I can say is if you are a green card holder or a resident, then you might be eligible for certain benefits depending on the length of time you've been in the country, how many quarters you've worked, what money you've put into the system. It is an incredibly complex calculation to try to figure out if somebody qualifies based on their resident status. And then you have to be a Texas resident. Being a Texas resident is not nearly so challenging, right? I have had people who have moved to Texas with an intent to stay in Texas and been deemed a resident like the next day, right? So there's not like a time period that's attached to moving to Texas to become a Texas resident. There is simply an intent to stay in Texas that you have to meet. So now let's talk about the actual qualification criteria. So Medicaid qualification is, once we get past those sort of threshold demographic issues, is a three-legged stool. And you have to meet all three of these in order to qualify. If you miss on any one of them, then you won't qualify. So we have financial metrics, we have medical metrics, and you have to have access to a program. That's the one that trips up a lot of people. So access to a program means that you have to be in a Medicaid qualified bed for 30 days in order to have your application certified. Or your name has to have come up on the STAR Plus waiver interest list, and they have to send you something saying, hey, you are eligible to apply now. You can't just need help, pull off the application and apply for Medicaid ahead of time. You have to already be in a Medicaid bed in a facility, or you have to have already had your name come up on the STAR Plus waiver interest list. Unfortunately, if you just have somebody who needs help and so you apply for Medicaid hoping that they'll, they meet all the financial qualifications and they meet the medical necessity qualification, and so you're going to apply and get Medicaid ahead of time, you'll get a denial letter and they won't tell you why it's denied. Right? It'll just say they've been denied. And then you're like, but why? Because they meet all the criteria. What is happening? Generally speaking, when I get that call, it's because there was no letter from STAR Plus waiver interest list saying that you're allowed to apply now. And they hadn't been in a Medicaid qualified bed for 30 days. So you have to have access to a program or be involved in some program in some way in order to apply for long-term care Medicaid. And again, I want to stress this is for long-term care Medicaid. This is not for any of the other 105 Medicaid programs in Texas. It's just for the long-term care Medicaid. You have to have access to a program. And here are the financial qualifications. So we're going to go over these pretty well in depth. But you just need to understand that these are sort of the raw numbers. So an income limit. So a Medicaid applicant cannot have income over $2,829 a month. This number changes every year. It's adjusted with the COLA, right? So every time there's a cost of living adjustment for Social Security and it goes up, then that number is raised. However much you can keep is raised. If both spouses need to apply for Medicaid, then the income that both spouses can have is doubled, right? So it's $5,628 a month. The countable asset limit is $2,000, and that number has not changed since 1989. So there has been no adjustment for inflation when it comes to a countable asset limit. And we're going to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say countable asset, because that is important, very, very important. And then the countable asset limit, if both spouses need to apply, is $3,000. Where it gets challenging is if one spouse needs to apply, right? So then there is a complex calculation, which I'm going to kind of walk you through, where basically they split your assets in half. And then the person qualifying can't have more than $2,000 in their half. and then the other person can keep their half so long as it's less than 154,140, right? And then there's a spousal needs allowance for income of $3,853.50. And what that means is the spouse at home is entitled to have that much income. And I'll kind of walk you through how that works. For some reason, my medical necessity slide isn't here. You also have to meet medical necessity, which means that you have a medical need for skilled care. Simply having dementia and needing somebody to sit with you so you don't wander off is not a skilled need, right? There has to be more to it than that. There has to be a need for a nurse. The nursing facilities will usually do the qualification, will usually like tell you whether or not someone meets medical necessity. For better or worse, some nursing facilities are very quick about this and they have no problem doing it and they know how to fill out the paperwork and it's fine. I've had nursing facilities tell a client of mine that a bedridden patient didn't meet medical necessity. And I was like, you are out of your mind. But there's nothing that the client could do except find a different facility because I can't force them. I'm not a doctor. I can't force them to do anything. And so, usually the facility will do that for the Star Plus waiver and for assisted living, or with Star Plus waiver, sorry, not for assisted living, but for the Star Plus waiver home health care benefit, there's usually a caseworker that will contact the family from Texas Health and Human Services and do that medical necessity evaluation. If you're working with an elder law attorney to get Medicaid qualification, then those are going to be part of the questions that they ask, because there's no point in doing like all this sort of financial stuff that we're about to talk about if you're not going to meet medical necessity. And there are companies out there that can do it, the third-party companies that can do an evaluation based on the criteria for Medicaid and say, yes, I believe that based on the criteria Medicaid uses, this person should qualify, or based on the criteria, I don't think this person will qualify. And so if you're kind of on the border, it's helpful to have that third-party evaluation to kind of, help you decide what to do and how to move forward. Medical necessity can be challenging. When we're in a skilled nursing facility, I usually leave it up to the skilled nursing facility. When we're dealing with Star Plus waiver, then if it's a question, I like to have that third party do the evaluation. Okay. Countable versus non-countable assets. So you can only have up to $2,000 of countable assets. So let's talk about what we mean when we say countable assets. We mean cash. We mean stuff that you can use to pay for your care. Any land or property that you own that's not your homestead that can be liquidated for cash, right? Mineral rights can be liquidated for cash, not easily and not for much, but they count. And sometimes, like, again, there's a complex calculation that can be done as to whether or not it's going to count as income or assets, depending on how much royalties are being kicked off by it. But generally speaking, mineral interests are going to count as something. Any asset that can be liquidated for the cost of care. So non-countable assets include your homestead. So with spouses, there's no limit, but for a single person, the homestead cannot be worth more than $713,000. Any amount that's worth over $713,000 in equity is that amount is considered a countable asset. So anything under 713,000 is not a countable asset. Now, just because it's not a countable asset, that does not mean that the individual's income can be used for its upkeep. So even if we are exempting the house as a non-countable asset, for a single person, someone's still got to pay the electric and mow the lawn, right? And so that's a conversation to have with your elder law attorney about what do we do with the house. When we're talking about a spousal situation, the home of spouses can be worth any amount. There's no limit to it as long as there is a living spouse. One vehicle, certain business property, certain livestock and farm equipment on a working farm might be exempted. So those might all be non-countable assets. I've got a question here. If there is property, half is my mother's and the other half was left to children, how would that count? Well, that's going to depend on what the deed says, how it was left, individual. Sometimes when you have property that's undivided, if you can't sell it because other people have to sign off on it, then we can get it exempted, but that's not always the case. And so that's one of those kinds of assets that would be evaluated. Right? I mean, the challenging thing about doing this talk is that all of you have questions about specific things, and I can't answer them without having a lot more knowledge. Just understand that every asset is counted differently. Everything has a different kind of evaluation going on, and it's really important to talk to somebody who understands what Texas Health and Human Services, how they're going to evaluate it, so that you know what you're getting into. And again, that's one of those that you just kind of have to, you talk to your elder law attorney about. What about burial plots, life insurance policies? Life insurance policies, it depends, right? I don't know. Term life, they're not countable. Whole life, there's a cash value. It might be countable depending on how much the cash value is. Spin downs, we'll talk about those towards the end. And yeah, we'll talk about spin downs towards the end. But those are like, when it comes to countable versus non-countable assets, I don't know. I can't answer your question because I without seeing the paperwork on it, without knowing exactly what it is, how it came about, I couldn't tell you, I couldn't evaluate it for you. There is no one answer to any of these questions. All of it is going to depend on the contract. It's going to depend on where it came from, how it came about, what the terms are, what the value is, everything. Everything matters. Everything is relevant. And all of it is going to come up with a, it may come up with a different answer for one of you and a different answer for a different of you. If a care receiver lives with a nephew, will the rules for a spouse still affect eligibility? If the person who's receiving care is married, yes. Like, it doesn't matter who is living with whom. It matters if they're married. And that's it. Like, marriage is the answer. How are stocks counted? Stocks are cash. Because you can liquidate them, right? Anything that can be liquidated for cash is counted. It's a countable asset, right? That's just like, these are just have to think about it in terms of, is there a cash value that could be, can this asset be sold or traded in a way to receive cash that would pay for care? And if it's not an exemption, then it's an asset that can be used for care. And so it is very likely to count. So then we have to figure out what to do with it, right? Like, that's the question. The question isn't, is it countable? Assume it's countable. The question is, what do we do with it? And that's when you talk to your elder law attorney. Like, that's when you have these discussions about what's going to happen next. I cannot expound on certain properties because certain business properties, like it requires reviewing tax returns. It requires knowing exactly how much the business property is bringing in. What does it own? How does it own it? I can't expand on it. Not without like reviewing your individual stuff. If there's nothing else you get out of this, it's that this is not easy. There's no one right answer. It's as complex as you think it is. And there's, it's not, it's just it's hard. It's hard doing this. So business property, an example of business property. So a working business, right? Like a self-owned business that is bringing in income. There might be certain property that the business owns that might be able to be exempt because it's owned by the business, but we would need to have all of the business documents. Is it a DBA? Is it an LLC? Is it a corporation? How does it own things? Who owns it? Is it a pass-through? Like, those, without seeing everything, I couldn't tell you. How often should the information trust will be updated, and is there a charge for that? So that switching gears. Wills and trusts should be updated when there's a change and they need to be, right? Review them generally every 5 years is my recommendation, but it may or may not be necessary for like Medicaid planning. So let's get back to kind of the countable versus non-countable assets. I cannot address anyone's specific circumstances, mostly because without doing a full review, any information I give you could be completely wrong. And I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction as a way of trying to like just get an answer out there, because there's not an answer. I can't stress that enough. There's not an answer without a holistic view of everything. So pitfalls that you have to be aware of. Gifts. Anything given away for less than fair market value in the 5 years prior to the application is presumed to have been given away for the purpose of qualifying for Medicaid. That's the presumption. Gifts include giving a car to a grandchild because no one's driving it anymore. It includes paying a daughter's cell phone bill, paying for college. It includes anything that's uncompensated transfer for less than fair market, or for anything that's uncompensated transfer. So a transfer for less than fair market value is a gift. That can include tithing, although that's a little easier to explain. We can usually explain that without too much issue, but it does include that. And if you're making an application, you have to give them the information. On the question, it says, have you transferred, gifted, or sold any asset in the last 5 years? And it would behoove you to be completely honest. You have to think about these things. Has there been anything sold, gifted, or traded away in the last 5 years? And was it for fair market value? And if not, there could be a penalty assessed. It doesn't mean that they can't qualify. It just means there's a certain number of days that they would have to privately pay for care. There are ways to overcome the presumption, but it depends on your circumstances, right? Like it just depends on what that gift was made for, how it was made, how long ago it was made, what the person's like medical condition was when it was made. There's any number of factors that go into potentially overcoming the presumption. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can't overcome the presumption and we just get penalized and we have to live with that. But again, that's another reason why you have an attorney assisting. Yes. So let's talk case study, right? Let me kind of walk you through it. The example assumes cash assets because different types of assets are treated differently and are going to require different planning. So for those of you with business property, for those of you with stocks, for those of you who are dealing with all these different kinds of things, this is just an example of like if someone just has cash, right? You can't assume anything I'm saying is going to apply to those kinds of assets because there are different rules for everything. I can't stress that enough. All right, so let's say a husband and wife have $2,000 in savings. This is just the example I gave earlier. Home is worth $300,000. Husband receives $2,900 in Social Security, and wife receives $1,800 in Social Security. So the $200,000 in savings is a countable asset. The home for $300,000 is non-countable. Awesome, right? Because we are entitled to keep a house, and that doesn't matter what the value is on it because there's a living spouse. So that $300,000 is non-countable, regardless if the applicant was single or married. Husband receives $2,900 a month in Social Security. That is going to be countable income to him, that $2,900. The wife receives only $1,800, but it's not countable because only the income of the applicant is countable. So if you have a situation where one spouse needs Medicaid and the other spouse is still working, right? And so the other spouse is bringing in, whatever her salary is, that is not attributed to the spouse that needs Medicaid for purposes of qualifying for Medicaid. So income and assets are treated differently, and you have to look at them differently, okay? So her income is only attributed to her. His income is only attributed to him. However, their assets are attributed to both. I don't care if you have a marital agreement. I don't care if you have a prenuptial agreement. I don't care if you have an inheritance that's solely in your name. I don't care if, like, all of those rules or family law rules and Texas Health and Human Services does not care. So if you have one spouse that inherited $2 million in some sort of money market account, and it's only in that spouse's name, that $2 million is countable as far as Texas Health and Human Services is concerned. So you do have to report it, right? So assets, you have to report everything. Everything is countable. Income, you report it, but only the income of the individual applying counts. Okay, so husband and wife have $200,000 in savings, which is countable. We're going to mark out the home. We're going to mark out her Social Security because we don't have to deal with those. So now what do? We have $200,000 in savings. So that is determined. Someone inevitably always asks, when do you determine this? Because money moves in your account all the time. Like, how do we know? It's determined as of 12:01 a.m. on the first day of the month in which the first continuous period of institutionalization lasting more than 30 days began. That's a mouthful. Basically, what it means is you look at the first day of the month when the person either went into the hospital and then to rehab and then the facility, or when they went into the facility, or like that, right? So again, this is going to be one of those things where your elder law attorney is going to walk you through it. Timing is everything. But that's our snapshot date. That's the date that we look at. We get at 12:01 a.m. on the first day of that month, we get a full picture of of all of the assets and everything, and then we split them in half. In this case, on that day, it was $200,000. So $100,000 is attributed to the husband, $100,000 is attributed to the wife, and the husband receives that $2,900 in gross Social Security. All right, so that $100,000 attributed to the wife, we don't have to worry about. She gets to keep that because it's less than $154,000, right? So she's entitled to keep anything less than that as far as splitting them up, as far as splitting that amount. And then we have to, and then the husband who needs benefits is entitled to keep up to $2,000. So we have to do something with his other part. And then he receives $2,900 in gross Social Security. So we have to create a qualifying plan to reduce his half by $98,000, right? Ideally, we want to create a qualifying plan so that the spouse will get the benefit of that $98,000. However, we decide to do that. There are different ways, and it will always depend on precisely what the circumstances of the individual are. And the husband receives $2,900 gross Social Security, which is more than that $2,829 allowable. But because we have a spouse, we have a solution. So we're going to create a qualifying plan to reduce the husband's assets. The husband is also entitled to $75 allowance, making the income $2,825. Now, this is not the same kind of analysis you can do if you have a single person. So please don't apply this to a single person's income. This is for spouses. The spouse at home is entitled to that monthly income of $3,853.50 from that first slide with all the numbers, right? So that's the spousal allowance. That's the monthly allowance that a spouse is allowed to have. So since she's allowed to have $3,853 and she only has $1,800, there's this difference of $2,053.50, right? And so she can take that from his $2,825 so that can get her up to $3,853.50 a month. And then he only has $775.50 that's going to go as copayment to the facility. This is complicated stuff. I don't know if I have said that enough times. I don't know how anybody applies for Medicaid for a spouse without assistance, because it is like, knowing this is very difficult. What you should walk away from this knowing is that there are things that we can do to help. Like there are ways to make sure that the spouse at home doesn't have to impoverish themselves. And there are things that we can do planning wise to help somebody get the care that they need without completely just devastating the spouse at home. So myths. I can give $18,000 in anticipation of Medicaid. No, you cannot. $18,000 is the gift tax exemption for IRS. IRS rules and Medicaid rules are not the same rules. You cannot do that. It would be considered a gift worth $18,000 and penalized for $18,000 for Medicaid. You cannot assume that anything else applies to Medicaid. IRS rules are not Medicaid rules. Yeah, they're just not the same. I only have to report the assets in my sick spouse's name. No, you have to report all assets of the married couple, everything. Inherited, separate property, property you purchased prior to marriage, like property you got in a divorce. It doesn't matter. There's no such thing as community or separate property in Medicaid planning. It's all just countable for spouses. Income is separate, assets are together. You have to account for everything. And don't think for a second that you can like leave stuff out. Because inevitably there's a paper trail for something somewhere. I had somebody one time fail to disclose $40,000 in paper bonds because they're paper bonds. Well, he was still receiving this like weird little 3-cent income. And I was looking at his bank records. I'm like, what's this for? And then he disclosed the bonds. And I'm like, we have to tell them, like, this is, you can't, it's criminal penalties if you don't tell them everything. So tell them everything. Find the rules, work with your attorney, tell them everything. If my spouse applies for Medicaid, the state will take my house. No. First off, Medicaid estate recovery in Texas does not recover if there's a living spouse. So if your spouse is going into a facility, you don't have to worry about your house if something happens to your spouse. Your house will remain yours. It is a forever exemption. For others, like there are other things again that we can do if we have properly drafted powers of attorney, if we have the ability to do, like there are ways we can protect the house from Medicaid estate recovery. And again, that's something to, I'll say it again, and talk to your attorney about. Planning for a single person. There are fewer opportunities to plan for a single person. We can protect money for a spouse because that there is a common policy goal that the spouse at home still needs to be able to live at home, right? For a single person, there are fewer opportunities, though there are some things that we can potentially do depending on the kind of asset that it is. It's always going to depend on the type of asset and whether or not we can turn a countable asset into a non-countable asset and what that's going to look like. If the single person's income is over that $2,829 gross, again, it's always gross. It's never the number for Social Security that goes into the bank account. That's the net. The gross is the including with the Medicare premium that they take out of Social Security, right? So it's always the gross amount. If the gross amount is over $2,829, then we can use like a Miller Trust or something, because there is an understanding that, you know, someone might have $3,000 a month in gross income, but that's still not going to be sufficient to pay for a $9,000 a month facility. And so we have to do these things. We have to have these things in place to make sure that they get that they can still qualify. Being over the income limit is one of the easier things that I can help with. Common terms you're going to hear: Miller Trust, which is only for income. It does not hold any assets. And there are very strict rules. It has to begin the month at zero and end the month at zero. Every penny has to be paid out of it, has to be paid to certain people at certain times for certain things. Spend down, right? It's going to take many forms, and it depends on what you're doing with it. It depends on what your goals are. You just have to be careful about how you're engaging in a spend down. And it should be part of an overall comprehensive plan. You know, just paying the nursing facility until you run out of money is a way to spend down, right? It's a spend down plan. But then there are other things that could be part of that depending on what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish. And sometimes when we're dealing with a single person and they don't have much to begin with, then maybe just paying the facility is the right plan until it's gone, and then you apply for Medicaid. There's nothing wrong with that. If we need to protect something or do something with something else, or there's some kind of, complexity involved, then, then you can certainly like contact somebody but sometimes spending it down just on the care is the right call, right? And then Medicaid compliant annuities or Medicaid annuities, again, these should only be used as part of a comprehensive plan. You don't want to get into a situation where they were unnecessary, you paid too much money for them, they go too long or too short, or they have the wrong provisions. You want to be very, very clear about how they're going to be used and why. So when it comes to doing all this, you got to gather your team, right? Your financial advisor, your accountant, your attorney, your care manager. Geriatric care managers are an absolute godsend. They are, generally speaking, have a nursing background or a social work background, and they can help navigate all kinds of issues with long-term care, as well as do wellness checks and help with medical visits and just kind of be boots on the ground for families who don't always have time or aren't around to help their loved ones. I'm a big fan of a care manager. And luckily there are more and more coming to Houston. There are a lot more in Austin, but there are more coming to Houston, which I'm very excited about. But you need all of these other people, because the financial advisor, you need to know about IRAs and what status they're in and who owns them and how they came about. And, is it an employment related IRA, or was it an individually funded IRA? Is it an SEP? How does that work? Because each one of those things is going to be treated differently, right? We have to know exactly where it is, what status it's in, et cetera. Annuities, life insurance contracts, you need the actual like contract that someone signed that says what it is, how it comes about, what the money is, like how much it's worth, what kind of penalties, is there anything, like all of that. And so knowing your financial advisor, knowing the accountant, right? So we can find things in tax returns sometimes that you wouldn't otherwise. The accountant knows everything. Talking to the accountant, knowing, especially if you're working with a parent with dementia who's been tight-lipped, shall we say, about their assets, finding their accountant and see if you get their accountant to talk to you about what's happening is going to be a godsend to figuring out where their assets are, how they're held, and what we need to deal with them for Medicaid qualification. Geriatric care manager, someone says, how does one find a geriatric care manager? I have a couple of recommendations that I can do, that I can give, and I'll send those to Ariel, and then she can send them out to everybody. I think that's the best. There's a few, there's an organization here. Let me see if I can find the name of the organization that you can go through. That's not it. And you have to be careful, because some managers are geriatric care managers and some managers are just care managers, and they help people with like special needs, like adults with special needs. So Aging Life Care Association is an organization of geriatric care managers. And so that might be a place to go find, like looking at the different chapters, that might be a place to find one. And like I said, I'll send Ariel some names too. Are there long-term care facilities in Texas that do not accept Medicaid? Sure, they're private companies. They don't have to accept Medicaid. There are definitely some that I know of in Houston that never have Medicaid beds available and don't accept Medicaid coming in. Now, they might allow a private pay patient who's been there for a while. They might be Medicaid qualified, and so they can allow somebody to switch to Medicaid later on, but they don't take people who need Medicaid as they come in. Absolutely. There are places that don't accept Medicaid in Texas. Every client situation is unique. I can tell that just by the questions that y'all are asking. Like some people are like business properties and stocks and this thing and that thing and how does this work? And it's like, that's what you see somebody about, because there's obviously a lot more complexity than just those one questions, right? Crisis Medicaid planning can extend the life of your retirement to help pay for care, maintain you and your spouse's quality of life. Pre-planning helps avoid that altogether. So if we have any time, getting ahead of this is always a better idea. Like I said, Medicaid avoidance is always the goal, but if we can't, then we do what we can to protect as much as we can and still get the care that we need. And keeping in mind that only an attorney can charge for Medicaid planning. So if you have been contacted by or have been using or been in contact with a company that does Medicaid qualification, they have to have an attorney that you work directly with if they're going to be charging you for their services. Because as I hope is very evident in this is some really complicated stuff, and it requires a level of, expertise and understanding about how it all works. So that's my presentation. Somebody's raising their hand. Ariel, I'll let you do the hand raising. It might have gone. They might not
Yeah, I
be.
think they might have put their hand down. If
Okay.
that was an accident and you want to ask a question, please raise your hand again.
So someone's asking for the Star Plus waiver interest list number for Montgomery County. I don't have the specific one for Montgomery County. I can give you the one for Harris County, which you might be able to, and I can give you the one for the state, but I caution you that I've not had a lot of good luck having clients get through on the 877 number I have for the state. So I would go through the 713 number first, and then see if they can put you in contact with the correct place for your county. So the Star Plus waiver interest list, the Harris County is 713-692-1635. And then the out of Harris County is 877-438-5658. If you cannot get anybody at that 877 number, like I said, I recommend calling the 713 number and seeing if they can transfer you over. You still might not get a lot of help, but maybe they can give you another number to call or something. And those numbers are also available in the slides from last week. Did I address the spin down question? So the spin down question is, spin down can be almost anything. It depends on what your goals are. So I'm going to say, no, I didn't address the question because there's not a specific question to address, right? That is going to be part of an overall plan. It's not going to be like, this is not one size fits all work. Every single situation is going to be different. What are we spending down? How much is it? What kind of countable assets do we already have? What can we use? I don't know. That's like, all of those are going to be options. Did I discuss the pros and cons of putting a home in a trust, and does Medicaid accept this choice? Not in Texas. Do not put your house in a trust in Texas, because Medicaid says that house is no longer yours. And if it's no longer yours, it can't be your homestead. It does not matter what the homestead law says. It doesn't matter if the trust says that it can be used for the homestead exemption. None of that matters. Do not put your home in a trust if you're trying to do Medicaid in Texas. That's not true for many, many other states. In many other states, you want to put your house into a trust. So if you have seen another presentation from another state and they're like, put your house into a trust, that's the way to get Medicaid. That's the way to get Medicaid in their state, but not the way to get Medicaid in ours, right? So be very, very careful about using trusts for any kind of planning. And that is, you have to talk to your attorney about that. Like, that is an absolute, you must talk to your attorney about that. And it's also going to depend on the kind of trust and how long it's been in effect. Like, if it's an irrevocable trust and you put the house in it over 5 years ago, then maybe. If it's a revocable trust and you put it in today, then no, right? So it's hard to answer that question, other than trusts are real tricky in Texas. Medicaid does not accept the homestead exemption from a house that's been in a trust. That I can tell you. Also, how can you get a copy of accounting records when keeping up with MERP? I'm going to come back to that question because I don't understand it. So the assets for a single individual to obtain Medicaid is 200,000. No, it's 2,000. 2,000, 2,000 are the assets for a single person. 2,000, not 200,000. Two. Hasn't changed since 1989. Makes me a crazy person. And I don't understand it. So ask that MERP question again. So MERP is Medicaid estate recovery. And Medicaid estate recovery, every state that has a Medicaid program has a Medicaid estate recovery program that says if there's anything left in the estate, when someone dies, then the state of Texas can come back and ask for reimbursement, right? For those assets, or for the money paid for the care. Generally speaking, the only thing left is going to be the house because it's the only non-countable asset that we keep. And so oftentimes people will have Medicaid estate recovery will come back and say, you know, we want anything in your probate estate. In Texas, so Texas does not have an expanded MERP statute. We have a very, very generous MERP statute for our families. And so you can only recover, Medicaid estate recovery can only recover assets in probate in Texas. And so if your asset passed outside of probate, then there's no estate recovery. I have an entire other hour on Medicaid estate recovery because it can be that much. When it comes to accounting for MERP purposes, when the state wants to know to recover funds from the estate, how do you know the amount being asked for is correct? You can ask. You absolutely can contact Texas Health and Human Services and request an accounting. And let me tell you, I have known a couple of attorneys who were helping families in Medicaid estate recovery find significant errors in billing, significant errors, like treatments that were never received were billed for. So you ask for that. You say, I want a full accounting. You might have to fight them for it. But there is you can get that information. You are entitled to that information. The estate does not just have to pay because MERP sent a bill. You are entitled to know that you are paying the right amount out of the estate. Especially if you're, so again, talk to your attorney, but if you're in a dependent administration, that's the best way to deal with Medicaid estate recovery. And I'm not about to explain what that means. Talk to your attorney about that. Because that's way outside the scope of this particular presentation. No, someone says a workshop on Medicaid estate recovery would be great. Happy to do it. Just let me know when.
And on that, if there are any other topics that you all would like to learn more about, I did put my email in the chat because I know there were some questions about trust, and that's a whole nother topic in itself. So please feel free to put it in the chat. Also, conferences are a great way to get information. The Alzheimer's Association has a conference coming up next Friday. So be sure, I'll send that out too as well. So lots of education out there for you all beyond today, obviously. So, but it's been great. This has been very, very helpful.
Wonderful. Like I said, if I leave you with nothing else, this is really difficult, complicated work, and you should not engage it on your own. If you have any questions, if your situation is in any way other than a person just simply does not have more than $2,000 and they're under the income limit, then at least seek a consultation. Just pay for an attorney consultation to walk you through where there might be red flags, where there might be pitfalls. You may not need to pay more than that. They might be able to say, you know what, you're in good shape. This is what you can do. You can pay me for this, but you don't have to. Or they're going to say, oh, this is going to be a problem and we need to fix it. And this is how much it's going to be, right? That is it doesn't hurt to have the consultation. How do you find a certified elder law attorney in Montgomery County? Well, first off, I work all over the state, and so you're welcome to contact me. But if you want to find a certified elder law attorney in your area, you can go to getelderlaw.com. That is the site for the National Elder Law Foundation. And the National Elder Law Foundation is the organization that does the certification for certified elder law attorneys. And so there's two things you can do. Actually, you can go to getelderlaw.com to find somebody in your area, or you can go to the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys website, which is NAELA. Let me just make sure it's not .com. Is it .org, NAELA? It's NAELA.org. That's NAELA.org. And then that's the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. You can just put your zip code in, and all of the attorneys within your zip code, within like whatever distance you say, 25 miles, 50 miles, whatever, will come up. And anyone who has a certified elder law designation, which is a CELA, CELA, that'll be on their information. So it should, next to their name, it'll say whether or not they're a CELA. And that's, which you can generally trust an attorney who's on the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, whether they have the CELA designation or not. It's just CELAs have a little bit more education in some of the dementia aspects. But I know a lot of incredibly good elder law attorneys that do not have their CELA designation, but I would still trust them with anything. So it just that's just one way that you can determine that somebody, you know, kind of has experience in what they're doing in this area. If someone says they are buying things for the elderly person, can they require the estate to reimburse those expenses? So sometimes,
So she
right?
said after death. I think
Oh,
she typed a
after death?
follow-up, yeah.
Oh, good luck with that. You'll have to go through the probate to do that. Like if it's after death and there's a probate that's been opened, you would have to file as a creditor in the probate to receive funds. And then you have to prove to the court that you are a valid creditor, right? I mean, that's the only way to get reimbursement after someone dies, is you have to go through the probate process and be a creditor to do that. How long, I think someone's asking, how long does a general consultation last? Maybe. So I do mine for an hour and a half. Different attorneys are going to be different depending on where you go. There's no, again, like everything else, there's no one right answer. Every attorney is going to be a little bit different. Find one that you like, find one that calls you back, you know, find one that you have a good rapport with, that you feel like you can trust. Like that's the best thing that you can do when you're looking for an attorney. Just like when you're looking for a doctor or any other professional, you need somebody that you feel has your best interest at heart, right? And that you feel good talking to, and that you're willing to open up and do some planning with. That's the key for when it comes to like finding a good attorney, is just, you know, trust your instincts. That's important. And I have to say this as well. Most of the elder law attorneys that I know in Texas, especially those that are members of Texas NAELA, we do this because it's a calling. We do this because it's like we are looking to help a vulnerable population. And so I have nothing but the utmost respect for the people in the elder law bar in Texas in general. Like there are some incredible and amazing attorneys that practice in this area in Texas.
And I will add to that, Angela. I think that I'm gonna just brag on you for a bit. I have heard from caregivers personally that have said you are so kind and so thoughtful. And sometimes it's just a consultation, just like Angela described. You don't necessarily need an elder law attorney, you just need somebody to process the information with. And that's really the purpose of a consultation. So I encourage you all to reach out to an elder law attorney sooner rather than later, especially if you have questions. A lot of you all have very, very specific questions, and it's impossible to answer them without having more information. So if it's on your list of things to do, please, you know, at the least, a consultation might save you a lot of time, at least, and money.
Yeah, it could save a lot of stress. If you just know, a lot of times you just need to know where the issues are. Like, here's where the issues are, and here's how to, like, here's your marching orders. This is what you like, here's how to get things set up so that when it's time to do the application, you'll be in the best possible position. And sometimes it's all you need. You just need someone to walk you through that. Sometimes you need more. but sometimes that's it. And so, yeah, thank you, Ariel. I appreciate that. So someone's asking a bunch of probate questions. So the people who are asking about the heirs and the probate and the assets and foreclosure, and contact a probate attorney to help you figure out what your rights are as a beneficiary or otherwise. I do not know, like, if there is something dealing with a probate and a foreclosure and all this stuff, like, that requires review of the entire like case to figure out what's happening. So I have no simple answer for you there. You need to contact somebody about that. I don't do contested work.
Angela, is there a prep list before visiting? Is there anything like
Yes.
about checklists?
Yes, whenever you contact my office, I give you get a checklist from me, and it's a lot. It's a lot. I ask for 5 years of bank statements because Texas Health and Human Services can require up to 5 years of bank statements. They don't always, but I want to know if there's any red flags I need to be prepared for when preparing an application. So I ask for a lot of stuff. I need to know literally everything. I need to know about every car. I need to know about the Jeep that's on the cinder blocks at the uncle's fishing cabin that you forgot about and is literally worth nothing because it doesn't run anymore and has vines growing up through it. I am not joking when I say that actually came up. I had a client that had that. He totally forgot that he had that Jeep, that the Jeep was in his name. Texas Health and Human Services contacted me and said, "Hey, what about this Jeep?" And so I was like, "Hey, what about this Jeep?" And he sent me pictures of it. And so I sent them pictures of it, and I'm like, it's a junker. And they're like, "Okay, cool, thanks." But that was it, right? Like, they just needed to know, but they will find it. They will find it. So yes, I do have a pre-consultation document as part of mine. Will the property count against Medicaid? Not about the probate. Again, I don't know who, like, did the person that died receive Medicaid? If so, then if there's any money left over, then Medicaid can recover it. If there's money that's going to a person who's currently on Medicaid, if it puts them over the $2,000 limit, then it could kick them off Medicaid. Like, that's it. I don't know anything. Got it. Okay, good. So yes, any money subject to probate could absolutely be subject to a Medicaid estate recovery. But again, find out to make sure that you're paying the right amount. Like, just make sure. And make sure they've crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's. Like, if they didn't send out certain forms on time, if they didn't do certain things in the proper way, then they can't recover, right? So they have to follow the rules too. And if they didn't follow the rules, then the estate doesn't owe them any money. So, and that's another, again, you'll talk to your probate attorney about hiring somebody who is familiar with Medicaid estate planning or Medicaid estate recovery, that can kind of help with that aspect of the probate if you have that question. Because that's a big question. Yeah. Yeah, I have a huge prep list. And again, different attorneys are going to ask for different things. Most of them are going to ask for about the same stuff that I do.
I want to clarify. Is there a handout or something that how to choose an elder law attorney?
Oh,
and I don't know if this is what the question was, but I think there's a difference between, because even before you get to that point to get the consultation documents, like nursing homes, this is a way that you evaluate a nursing home or an assisted living. Is there a way that you can kind of vet or evaluate an elder law attorney, or things that you might want to think about before you get to the consultation part?
Are they a CELA? Like, do they have their certified elder law attorney designation? Are they a member of NALA, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys? How long have they been practicing in elder law? How many other things does their law office do? Do they do elder law and estate planning and real estate and criminal defense and civil defense and litigation here and litigation there? Maybe you want someone who focuses a little more in one area. unless it's a larger firm with a bunch of attorneys that do a bunch of different things. But generally speaking, you want somebody who does elder law, estate planning, probate. It's all kind of the same, like those sorts of things. Special needs planning. Somebody who also does planning and special needs is generally a good sign as well, because it's somebody who works with vulnerable populations. And now not everybody who's in elder law works with special needs, and not everybody who does special needs works in elder law, but that's something to think about when you're kind of looking at different attorneys. What are the areas that they practice in? What do they, what are their claims? Are they guaranteeing Medicaid qualification? Because you can't, they could change the rules on us any minute. Like, I can't guarantee anything because the legislature could literally like pull the rug out from under us, or there could be a policy change that a planning technique we've been using for years could all of a sudden no longer be valid because the policy changed in Texas Health and Human Services. We do the best we can with what we have right now. I hate guarantees.
Okay, well, thank you. That's helpful.
Welcome.
Perhaps I think, just thinking my social worker brain, it might be helpful. I was jotting them down, but if I
Right.
can get with you and I can just say, hey, this is what, like when I'm
Yeah.
giving the resource to someone, this is what you might want to look for. These are the questions that you might ask. Cause I don't think there's that information that's just coming out of your off of your
Right.
knowledge and your information that
Yeah,
you.
I haven't thought about it. So I have a question. There's one last question that I do want to address, only because I can't address it, but I want to tell you why. For the single person with monthly pension and a 401k distributions, those will be counted as income also, correct? So that policy I was just telling you all about, that could be ripped out from under us at any time. There's an unwritten policy that deals with how IRAs and 401ks are treated, depending on whether or not they're in required minimum distribution status or not. Like, depending on how the status is and how that IRA came about, will determine whether it's considered an asset or considered income. So that's a really good question. And that is going to be one of the things that you're going to talk about with your elder law attorney when you go through this, because the designations matter. How it came about, where it's at now, how long, like it all matters. And so, yeah, that's one of those assets that's like, I have somebody right now who's not in required minimum distributions. It counts as an asset. I have other people who are in required minimum distributions. It counts as income, but it's annuitized over 12 months. And so we have to have it's so complicated, but it's unwritten. It used to be that all IRAs just counted as assets. And then one day they changed their policy. And we were all at a conference when the attorney from Texas Health and Human Services got up and told us about the change in policy, and you could hear a pin drop. Like, everyone was just silent going, what? Because they just changed how they did stuff. And it was such a massive change that we were all like, okay, well, now we have to change how we're doing all of our planning. They could change it again. They might not. We don't know.
So what happens, Angela, when they make a change and somebody is already on Medicaid?
They're generally going to be grandfathered in. I say that, I don't know. They could absolutely kick them off, and then we have to like scramble. Like, we could totally scramble. It depends on if they make the policy change, and it depends on what they do, right? The agency could make the policy change and say, you know what, if you're already qualified under these rules, then you can stay. But they're not rules. That's the thing. This isn't a rule, it's a policy. And so we don't have anything to rely on to say for certain, this is how you're supposed to treat it. We have this sort of unwritten agreement that this is how it works because somebody told us somewhere, sometime that it does. And it has been working that way in our qualifications. But, we don't know. We don't know. That's the thing about dealing with an administrative agency. It's not a court of law. There's nothing like, there's certain things that are black and white, but they could be changed at any time, depending on what happens with the legislature. And then there are policies that some are black and white, some are not. And so we just do the best we can with what we have right now, understanding that things change. And we might be prepared for it and we might not, which is why I get very uncomfortable around guarantees. Because I don't know. I hate promising more than I know I can deliver. I can tell you what will qualify you today. And I can hope that by the time we get you qualified, it's still the same. So far, that's been the case for me, but it might not always. Again, more reason why to contact somebody. Because if you think you know the answer now and it changes, it may not be the same answer by the time you're ready to apply, right? So it's worth just like having the consultation. If for no other reason to know what you're getting yourself into. All right, I've taken way more of your time than I should have. Thank you all so much for inviting me to come, and I look forward to doing more of these as always. Ariel, you are so gracious, and I appreciate you so much. Linda, thank you so much thanks the AARP for sponsoring this, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you all. So we will be sending out the recording. It'll probably come today or tomorrow. I have to upload it to YouTube. If you have not received any of the emails, just send me an email. I did put it in the chat. My email address is egreen@carepartnerstexas.org. Texas is spelled out. So thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank you, Angela. This has been great. I swear I learned something new every time. So thank y'all so much.
To learn. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Y'all have
you.
a great rest of your day.
Bye. Bye.